We can reveal to you guys now the leaders for these two players and who they've chosen to bring as their lineup.
So we see Green Knight with a very, I think, pretty standard lineup. Morvrin, I think the stronger Nilfgaard leader right now in the competitive meta. Bran as well, big showing after the buff to discard and Coral in general. Bruver, a great Squirtle control leader, and well, Guernicora, I think we all saw in the faction challenge, she kind of dominated that one as well. Whereas Molegion has a bit of a different lineup.
Yeah, he's gone for a little bit of spice. We don't see monsters at all, which I think is going to surprise some of his competitors. And not only do we not see monsters, we don't see Bran, we have Crack instead. And then we have Princess Ada for Northern Realms and Philavandrel on the side of Squirtle.
Yeah, so maybe they're tournament decks. You know, you bring a deck that's maybe not the best on ladder, but can be very good in a setting where you can kind of control the variables that come into play. You have a ban as well. We'll see them just now what the bans are, but Molegion, a lot of control over what he wants to ban, and I think it might possibly be maybe a long round leader. Could be a Bruver. We'll find out very soon once those bans come online. But I think the tournament setting allows for a much kind of a different meta compared to the ladder, for example.
Yeah, that is true, and this is where players don't yet know the deck list. So you only have the information for the leader, and sometimes you have this whole kind of bamboozle strategy where the leader isn't necessarily the kind of deck that you expect. So when players are picking their bans, you have to kind of make a decision in terms of what it is that you're going to choose not to play against. And I think Green Knight, looking at the leaders, at least his lineup looks pretty standard, whereas Molegion, I think we're going to see a little bit more spice.
Once you see the deck list, we'll kind of find out what each leader does, but right here we see it right away. Bruver is the ban on Green Knight, and Molegion is going to get his Crack and Crate ban, so it's not exactly King Bran, but still Crack and Crate, a very consistent deck that has some control options with the leader ability, of course, one ping every 2 turns, but also just a very consistent deck that has, Horn has a lot of great cards in Skellige, considered by many pro players to be kind of the strongest faction right now.
And I think this is a very interesting ban, a little bit because of Molegion strategy, but when we spoke to Green Knight fully expected his Skellige list to be banned, and going into this, he's only just found out that, hey, you're playing Skellige, you're not playing Bruver, so that might shake things up a little bit. But let's have a little peek into what is actually inside these decks. What is going on with Green Knight's lists?
So right away we see, very first important thing to know, I think, is the artifact removal. He is teched in every single deck to have at least one artifact removal card. We saw Cam's also doing the same in his decks. That didn't work out for him when he wasn't playing many artifacts, but in this case we see that clear tech for Green Knight, and that shows the tournament setting as well.
Yeah, we also have a little bit of prep in terms of things like the mirror, but cards that help against the mirror and also should help against other decks as well. I mean, we're going to mention Erden a little bit on the side of Bran. Not seeing it be quite so successful in that last set, however.
And Bruver is the deck that it was banned. It is a very long round kind of control deck with crushing traps and just, obviously the Bruver ability that synergizes with that as well. And Molegion, he did tell me that he was kind of scared of that deck because it is a long round deck. He doesn't want to deal with it. He has many decks that go for a long round. His Philavandrel is actually kind of an engine-based Philavandrel, and also, of course, NR with a very long damage-oriented round that finishes with Hubert, for example. So I think that was the decision, banning Bruver instead of kind of a stronger deck in theory in Bran or Guernicora, for example.
Yeah, when we have a look at Molegion's deck list, it kind of starts to paint a little bit more of a picture in terms of Molegion's strategy, a little bit of soft targeting towards things like monsters and Bran, and as a result, he doesn't want to play that Bruver. That's something that he's taking off the board, whereas he's okay with Bran. It's something that he expected people to bring, and they have brought. So, if you're playing against the decks that you expect, you're going to be feeling pretty good, I would say.
Yeah, we see Leo Bonhart, a lot of tall unit removal. I think monsters in the old version of Gwent and in Homecoming, the new version as well, the finally released version of Gwent. There's always been a faction like Monster that has a lot of tall units. That's kind of one of the archetypes, underlying in that faction, and it's always been an easy deck to target because you can just tech for the big, removal, and go into maybe a last say round 3 and just win the game because of that. And that is Molegion's strategy, I think, for the most part, teching for those tall units and getting that huge swing in his favor.
Yeah, but with that said, his aided list is running Summoning Circle, and that's something that is very targetable by Green Knight's list. He went for that artifact removal, whereas when we spoke to Molegion, he said that he wasn't too worried about artifacts, and it wasn't something that he felt obligated to tech. So we're going to be interesting to see A, how these players pilot these decks, and B, how they react to one another.
We see right away a very clear matchup here where Guernicora has a lot of points. Thrive is a fantastic mechanic. I think a lot of people agree, or maybe don't agree, but the big thing against a deck like Philavandrel that's very engine-based, surprisingly. Squirtle not normally known as an engine-based deck, but in this case it is. there isn't much control in monsters. You have Cyclops, sure, but not much else in general. So we'll see how Green Knight can take control of the game. Maybe he can win round 1, but maybe he loses control in round 3, and the engines overpower him in a long round. So we'll find out exactly, how he pilots this deck.
Yeah, and it's similar when you look at things like Bran. Bran also not a very engine-heavy or a removal-heavy deck, so we should expect to see a lot of engines on the side here of Molegion on the red side of the board.
Green Knight is on blue coin, or what is now considered the tactical advantage side.
Yep.
There is no real blue coin anymore.
Yeah, and he has to decide here, how exactly is he going to open this up. Typically, we'll see the Gurnicore ability. There it is, the new leader. She spawns and summons Gurnicore's fruit, and then when you play a unit bigger, it gets boosted. Or if you happen to have the Griffin, you can then destroy it. And it's okay to destroy that fruit because on the next turn, this ability will reset if there's no fruit on the board. Like, it's always fruity when Gurnicore is around.
And it's a great starter, obviously 8 points. I think nowadays with Homecoming, you have to really think about cards, their value being the points per provision. And of course, Griffin, that's 8 points for 7 provisions, so already kind of a good start if you're looking for efficiency in terms of your point values going forward.
Yeah, so then Molegion's going to decide how exactly he wants to set up this round and what it is he wants to do in terms of the first round. Because first round is interesting. It can be short. Some people, they like to get to that 7-card spot and then pass and then go into a longer round 2 and 3. But some people really like to push. And Molegion is going to have to make decisions in how he plays some of these engine units. For example, Yennefer, she's going to be dealing damage every turn. Similarly, Pavko, he has the ability damage a unit by 1, and that's an order with a 1 cooldown. So 1 damage per turn. Yennefer hitting the highest targets per turn, and I think Molegion's going to have to try and sniff out how Green Knight wants to play this in terms of round length, and that's going to be a very key strategy.
The tricky thing is this Philovangelist is not at all a meta deck. It's not something you see on Pro Ladder very often. I think Molegion worked with the competitive team and the analysts at Team Aretusa to try and craft a deck that could do well, and it's also a surprise. So it has this engine base that's not something you see very often, I think, so that might catch Green Knight by surprise. If he doesn't value the threat of a long round with a lot of engines too much, he might just say, I give this round up very soon, and then he might get punished. So we'll see if the surprise factor also plays kind of a part in this matchup as well.
We see a very standard play coming out of Gurnicore there, thinning the Wild Hunt Riders from the deck. Basically, the way they work, if you have the largest unit on the board, when you play one, it summons the other one from the deck and thins it. And obviously, an 8-point Griffin was pretty big. But we see an answer coming out of Molegion in the Dwarven Skirmisher here, using it to damage but not kill that Griffin in order to gain a boost on his side.
Again, it's all about point efficiency, finding the exact situation to get the maximum points from every card. In this case, 5 points for 4 provisions, still, keeping it above that standard base you want to keep it on. So both players are going to do their best, I think, to just try and find maximum points on all of their plays. Because that's what I think this new and finally released version of Gwent is all about, trying to find, the little small plays that are going to give you, the edge over the long, kind of the war. Every single battle has a win along the way.
For sure. It's worth noting that was a very quick play coming out of Molegion there. He was very certain, how he wants to play against this list, and that can be a little bit intimidating for your opponent if they seem that confident where they're not utilizing the full length of the timer.
This is Molegion now, I think, or Green Knight rather, saying, I have a huge lead here. I'm going to use my tactical advantage now to put some pressure on my opponent. He either starts catching up soon, starts making some bigger plays, but this is going to be just carryover plays from Molegion instead. But the big thing here is that even though there's a big gap in cards, you can't really pass if you are Green Knight, because your opponent can spend up to 4 cards, or until he has 4 cards in hand. Then he just passes in round 2, draws 3 in every round, and he has a very long round 3, which benefits the Philovangelist, and also has his 10 cards back again, so card advantage is back, equal or in his favor actually. So.
And not only that, is it gives him opportunities to set up cards that have resilience. We see Gabor here being played on the front row, gain resilience. That means it will be carried across to the next round, assuming it's not removed. And we talked about the fact that, removal options are a little bit limited when it comes to Gurnicore, although with Cyclops in hand, you can use that, as you see, to sacrifice a unit. And that's a 10-point unit he sacrificed just to deny the carryover.
But this is Green Knight saying, I'm noticing that the Molegion does not care about this round. He's just playing for carryover. He's playing to pass early on. He's going for the long round. The same thing Gruber does in round 1. He says, I'll play 3 cards. I'll wait for you to maybe use your better card instead, and then I'll go for a very long round 2 where you can try and bleed me, but maybe you don't succeed, and I can get the card back, or go into a very long round 3 as well. So very good read by Green Knight. It seems kind of a bad play, but I think both players are at the next level where they know exactly what each other player wants to do.
Yeah, I think Green Knight has sniffed this out pretty efficiently, I would say, and both players relatively new. Both players are actually qualifying through the online qualifiers rather than through Crown Point. So this is like the battle to see who is the ultimate online qualifier and face off against Wangid in the semi-final tomorrow. So we wait to see here. Basically, I would say Green Knight's in control in terms of the length. He won the first round, so he can choose what he spends this round, but with a big card full of 9 hands, you're drawing into 3 in the next round, and if you overdraw, those get converted into mulligans. So he has to decide, does he favor draws or does he favor mulligans? And if he can sniff out the number of engines that we see in the hand here of Molegion, you kind of want 2 mid rounds, but that's going to be a little bit tricky to achieve.
And this is the tricky part about a Gwent now, that you draw 2 cards, you won, your opponent knows exactly what you're doing in round 1. Now you have to decide. You can play 2 cards and kind of throw them away. You're back at 7, you draw 3 for round 3, and you're back up to 10. But if you play 1 more card, you go down to 6, all of a sudden your opponent has that window to say, I'm going to best you this very round, and then I can try and steal a card back and go a card up into round 3. So that's the most important point in this round. This card doesn't matter too much. The next card won't matter either. But the third card, if he commits to it, if Green Knight goes into a bleed in round 2, that's a turning point where all of a sudden there's a chance for Molegion to come back into the game and try and get that card and keep it for the rest of this round.
And we see Philavandrel being opted to be used there by Molegion, boosting all of the units in his hand by 1. His opponent may be called Green Knight, but that hand is looking pretty green with all those boosts. On top of that, playing the Hawker Smuggler we see here. And this is one of those engines, but it's kind of a cheaper engine compared to some of the gold options. And it's one of these things that says, hey, this is going to give me points per turn, and it's going to boost a random unit in my hand, so those points can be saved for round 3.
And Green Knight is making I'm pretty sure he's going to try and go for a bleed here. I think he knows it's an engine-based deck at this point. He knows he has to try and not go into too long of a round 3. There is some catch-up potential from Molegion. He does have the Ike in hand and the Dragon in Octopus as well, so he has a chance to maybe waste a win condition in round 3, but also try and catch up and keep his cards.
Yep, Ike allowing you to destroy a unit with 8 or more power, but if you have a dragon, you can use it the turn that you play it. We see a Mahakam Defender coming out on the side of Molegion, and again, this guy is boosted because of Philavandrel, so this automatically generates another engine, but these are these bronze engines, and considering this is actually investing in the future rounds, I think Molegion's not too worried about a short round 3, considering he can invest points in the future.
There's the first amount of removal coming down. You can only hit the target in the front. Cyclops does have 2 reach, so very careful. Cannot hit that dwarf in the back. Instead, they're going to try and stop that hand buff mechanic coming down from the smuggler. But another one will take its place. So Molegion definitely likes some thick cards in hand.
And it's one of those plays that's a little bit frustrating to see when you happen to have Gimpy going in your hand, because he damages an enemy and all copies of it by 3. So if you happen to see 2 smugglers, if he'd waited, he could have done more damage, but I think ultimately removing that investment in the Bank of Molegion was a wise decision.
We have seen already the point has passed where Green Knight has committed to the bleed here, and there's a chance where there's a big point gap right now. But if Molegion were to somehow be able to pass this in 1 card and then continue passing Green Knight's score every turn, he would eventually go into round 3 a card up, and that's obviously a major thing in Gwent that hasn't changed over the course of Gwent's history. It's always card advantage is king, and in this case, slowly he's making it. He's making these committal plays. Already we're at only a 2-point gap, so Green Knight has to start saying, is this my chance to pass?
Yeah, we start to see those ponies appearing on the board. Unicorn and Kyrenex go hand in hand because when one is on the board, the other gains a benefit. Kyrenex can be utilized to deal 4 damage, but that doubles up to, what's this? 8 points of damage if that unicorn stays alive. And in terms of removal options, Monsters is sadly lacking, and we've seen a lot of Cyclopses already.
By the sequencing we're seeing from both players, you can kind of read a lot about their game plan. Just from seeing Green Knight not playing the Neckers, for example, I think we know he's not going to go all the way to the very last card, or else his Neckers have lost a lot of value, obviously. And the same for Molegion. He doesn't want to play, for example, as Yennefer. It's a great card in the long round, but he doesn't want to commit to this round and just go into round 3 without any options, for example. So it's kind of a very fine balance. We see here, Geralt of Rivia going to take down that dwarf in the back row and still keep this gap pretty big.
Yeah, Green Knight has to make himself some wiggle room here. And considering he's not able to deal with the pony on the background, the unicorn, and deny the Kyrenex's extra value, he's going to have to make a tempo play. And Geralt of Rivia is that because that Mahakam dwarf in the back row boosted all the way up to 8.
Of course, you do see the unicorn has to survive on the board, so Kyrenex is going to be a fantastic, 5-point body plus 8 points of damage. You see the Griffin, perfect target for that. Would enable the Ghoul this turn, but there is already one Griffin in the graveyard anyway, so it's still, already been enabled from round 1. But that is a way to catch up here. We see the Ike instead coming down. Zeal is there, like you said, because of the Octopus in hand. Now only a 1-point gap.
And that Ike, I think it depends on whether you expect to see particularly tall units that you can deal with later on. I mean, he opted to save the Karnax. How do you feel about that?
I think he knows that Green Knight might want to go a bit deeper into this. We see a very good hand for Green Knight for a short round 3. He has the Ghoul, going to be a great 9-point play for 6 provisions, and also the Osril, going to be maybe eating here the old Spear Tip Asleep if it's played. But can you risk playing it? You're only going to be 10 points up. Kyrenex would enable, if there's obviously going to be a big unit with a 9-point unit coming down, so it would be enough to close the gap. And then Ockfist, if it's played and it can pass, the points that Green Knight has on the board, and you have the order effect the next turn, that's already going to be, game, and you know that Legion's going to keep a card for round 3 and be a card up on you.
I think in terms of the Ike play, you do have to be concerned about how tall your opponent has chosen to go with the way that they've built the deck. And in some ways, it's maybe better to guarantee that target that we saw on the Griffin now, considering they're now both in the graveyard, rather than maybe saving it, hoping that he's going to play, say, an old Spear Tip, or say a Goliath or a Count Caldwell later on. And we actually see the pass coming out on the side of Green Knight.
This is the mind games we were talking about. This is the very fine balance between bleeding and knowing when to get out. Green Knight says, this might be my last opportunity to make it out and not lose a card. He takes it, but Molegion was strong enough mentally to save a lot of these cards like Yennefer, like the Ockfist, like the Pathco Gale, and boost them as well. His engines have been giving him carryover value. So that's the whole idea behind this deck. You obviously don't want cards like Agitator and Wolfpack this turn.
No,
So
Wolfpack is
Mulligans
going
will come
straight
in.
in the bin. Bye-bye, Foglet. You are no more. But there's Count Caldwell, and we did talk about those large unit removals, but, are you worried that your opponent could remove that, or are you worried that your opponent can steal it? Because Caldwell is an interesting card. He does change size depending on which unit is largest.
A very swingy card. He's, like we talked about, the points per provision is great. He has, 10 points for 8 provision. That's fantastic. And not, you just play, it's a big body. You can play it round 3 and have, a solid 10-point play without having to set anything up, for example. But if he swings to the other side, it's a 20-point swing, and you just lost the game. So it's a very tricky card to play. It only fits in some decks. You have to be very careful when and how you play it.
And you know what actually damages the highest unit on your side of the board? Yennefer Conjurer. So this is going to be very interesting in terms of where that Caldwell does choose to end up. Although the longer you hold on to him, the fewer turns he can be a traitor and run to the other side.
Now we see Kyrenex here without the Unicorn to support it, so maybe we would have hoped to see maybe the Kyrenex last turn instead and have the Ike for this turn, but still, I think Molegion's in a pretty good state. Ockfist is going to be pretty good. 7 card, round 3 is not too bad. It's not the longest round, but not the shortest either. We do have kind of that Skirmisher, not the greatest play, but still pretty decent. And in Green Knight's hand, Nithril, not going to find value in this matchup. Talk about him having artifact removal in every single deck. In this case, not going to find the greatest value, but still a 5-point body. Could be worse.
I don't hate the Ike in the last round simply because Molegion doesn't have last play, and a dead Ike is something that feels bad. So guaranteeing the value on it, and thus maybe reducing the value on Kyrenex, I think is a safer play.
And this is what we talked about, efficiency here. Neckers are great, but they have one big counter, and that is the Archer. The swing there, it seems like a small thing because these are bronze cards, but these are the very small advantages that we were talking about earlier on. This is what might just win you the game.
Yeah, we see these two archers sitting there in the range row and just pinging off the 1-point units on the side of Green Knight. And his board is empty. And Pavko, he's ready for all of these lower point units to just ping off the things that he needs to. Although I feel like shooting the fruit is a bit of a waste of points.
It most definitely is, because it'll just come back the next turn anyway.
I mean, I guess if you have no other targets, you may as well shoot the fruit. And with the use of the archer there, that did completely clear the board. And deny that Thrive as well, because those Neckers would have gotten bigger and bigger as time goes on. We see the Thrive effect triggering there on the fruit. If you play something larger, it gets stronger.
The viewers might wonder here why this is played so early. Normally you play these big units later on to keep them kind of safe from some removal, but in this case, if this dies, the Osril becomes better. So there's kind of the thing where you kind of want it to die in a way. If it dies, you have that extra bonus as well, so it's not too bad if it does.
But I would argue that Molegion isn't going to kill it. He doesn't need to. He can just ping it down and make it small. And you've got this 8-point Pavko on the side here. So he's got a tall unit himself. And Caldwell, as we said, every turn, on turn end, he moves to the row with the highest units on the battlefield. And as time goes on, it's looking more and more like that's not going to be Green Knight.
Also important to read the text very closely for a lot of these cards, because they have very different triggers. You have to read on ally turn, on your opponent's start of the turn of the 7th year. It's complicated. Some of these cards are very high IQ, so important always read the tooltips, make sure you understand how everything works because it can get a bit tricky.
And these engines are just stacking up for Molegion. There is a reason these decks are called engine overloads. King of Beggar there, boosting the lowest unit in your hand again on turn end. So we're seeing those boost effects playing into one another, and he's getting, at least 3 points per turn from these 3 engines. That's a lot of points per turn, considering how many turns there are.
And the positioning here might matter a lot in all of these decks. You have to know what to play around. In this case, Gwent has the Dwarven Skirmisher only, has 1 read, so it has to be played melee row. But there's also cards like Lacerate and row stacking row. So you have to kind of balance what you play around and how, you don't know your opponent's deck list. He might have Lacerate, he might have kind of wide row damaging effects. So it's a tricky situation. But in this case, we see Yennefer finding so much value. When you line everything up, it hits every single unit that's at the same strength or value point. So this is looking like the Televangelist is working magically here for Molegion.
Yeah, it's doing exactly what he wanted him to do. We did see the Whispers there used to deal 4 damage and remove the King of Beggars from the board, so deny at least one of those engines. But, we talked about 3 points per turn, but Yennefer now is currently sitting at 4 points per turn just on her own. And there's a reason why a lot of people are Team Yennefer.
We talked about monsters being a very good deck, has great thrive mechanics, one of the strongest keywords I think in Gwent at the moment, but we said it at the beginning, it has very little removal aside from Cyclops. So you see all these engines that cannot be locked, cannot be removed for the most part. You have Yennefer, you have Ockfist, and you can just look at it and say, well, I'm in a bit of a pickle here because it's going to do a whole lot of damage in this kind of long round here, 7-card round 3. It might just give, I think, Molegion the edge. And
Molegion, he's feeling pretty comfortable, at least with the state of this board. He doesn't feel like he has to trigger that Ockfist straight away. Ockfist will damage all enemies by 1, but considering you've seen no removal on Pavko or on Yennefer, there's no reason to trigger it this round. You're not necessarily worried about that removal, and we can see him there. They're all 4s again.
And all these cards working together, synergizing the deck. When you build it, you think of the universal game plan, what you want to do together, how cards benefit each other. And in this case, we see the Skirmisher lowers the Ghoul down to 5. Pathco Gil hits it down to 6. Pathco Gil hits it down to 5, and again you get that extra value from Yennefer's ping. So Molegion really just showing a masterclass of deck building and kind of tournament tech targeting monsters, and it's worked out very well for him. 9 points up. Kyrenex still in hand.
Yeah, and the thing is, when he does choose to play that Ozrel and consume a unit from his own graveyard or his opponent's graveyard, that's just going to get shot down with the Kyrenex. So although the Ike is spent, the Kyrenex is still going to enable Yennefer to hit multiple targets.
Talked about point efficiency as well. Ozrel finding a decent amount of points. 9 isn't too bad. But Ockfist is still not activated. Kyrenex is still there with a boost as well. The engines are still ticking every single turn, so this looks like it's Molegion's game to win.
It is. Molegion, he can just ping down that Ozrel down to 5, then utilize the Yennefer on 2 targets, then the Pavko or the Ockfist. It doesn't really matter in that situation, the order for those two, because they're still going to be 6 and 1 apiece. And look at that point gap, 17 to 34 with only 10 in the hand of Green Knight. That's game 1, Molegion.
And we saw Cam's hiding information in the last game. The players don't know each other's deck list, so it's still partly a secret. We're going to see a pass there, a very smart pass from Green Knight saying, maybe I have Count Caldwell in my deck, maybe I don't. I'm not going to give you that information for free. There's no need to. And the first game will go to Molegion, a very strong showing, and I think his game plan worked out perfectly. And
that is what he said. He told us, I'm soft targeting monsters and Brand, and we just see just how well that targeting does work, and those engines can provide huge value when they're not removed.
And of course, we will see an alternating tactical advantage or coin flip, so Molegion will be going first at the moment, and Green Knight will have the chance to respond in that round. We're going to have a bit more control over how that round 1 goes.
Yeah, and in terms of their decks, players have certain decks that they enjoy or favor playing, whether they're going first or second, and that Philavandrel list is definitely a red coin list. We saw the strategy in round 1 of just kind of throwing out cards and bleeding out your opponent before you move into round 2 with a full hand of cards and then trigger that Philavandrel effect.
It's the same with Brewer. Brewer is another deck that you want to play on red coin. You can play it on blue coin. You play 3 cards, your opponent catches up, he forces you into either lose on even or go into a long round 1, which is not favored for a long round deck. So it's very tricky, but these players, of course, know exactly what they're doing, what decks to bring when, and Green Knight likes his Morvrin on red coin.
Green Knight, Morvrin, Molegion, Morvrin. What are the differences? We see Commander's Horn and Menno for Green Knight, whereas Molegion is running the Han Marvin kind of more Leo variant. There are actually quite a few differences in these mid-range Morvran decks.
Both have a lot of similarities too, though. We have the lock package is something that we see in pretty much every Nilfgaard list at the moment. We have Lethov Gullet, we see Ox, and we see Serret as well, all benefiting each other depending on if they're in hand or not. So a lot of different keywords and different abilities happening, synergizing with the rest of the cards in your deck.
And one thing to note about Green Knight's list is he does actually have that option with Commander's Horn to play it twice if he has it in hand, which he does, because he can utilize the Commander's Horn in one round, boosting 5 units by 3, then use a Seer, which we see here, in order to shuffle a card back into your deck. And typically, this is used to put Roach back in, pull her out as a 9-point play, but if you put that Commander's Horn back in, Menno, target draws Commander's Horn, you play it again. So he's got some powerful units.
A very subtle play, but it's a play that can win you a game for sure. 17-point swing with Menno into Horn is pretty brutal in round 3. So, but of course, I think there might be an expectation of this play happening, especially if you see the Horn shuffled back. Players are very, they look at all the small details. They look at the player's graveyard, see what's missing, and they know what's happening, and they know what could be coming later on. They can play around that with cards like Yurden, for example. We saw Cam's bringing it in many of his lists.
That is true. Although, if we also look at the hand of Green Knight, no Witchers. Well, no Witchers that pull each other's. We do have a Orcs. He's technically a Witcher, but he's not a Witcher trio. He ain't no Lambert.
It's definitely true. We see Infiltrator in hand as well. I want to kind of take a note about this card. It's a 4-point card. It's not very flashy. You play in the melee row, it has an effect that's very interesting because it has a very abstract effect in terms of the value it gives. If your opponent has, a lot of gold cards in his deck in round 3 and he mulligans and he draws this card instead, the points it gets basically is the value of the gold card you could have drawn minus the point gap between the Infiltrator and that card, and that's, if you look at the provision it cost, if that goes off the way you intend to, that could be like a 10-point swing for a bronze card that costs 4 provision. So it can be very, very strong if you play it right.
Yep, we see there's a very standard Nilfgaard opening on the side of Molegion, using that Nilfgaardian Knight for 6 points, then using the Witchers to thin. We do see Lambert, who we were mentioning, come down there on the board. And you interested to hearing a Limerick, Panda?
I'm not interested, Jaggers. Please do not say it. I've heard this. You guys don't know in rehearsals how many times I've heard this. My brain is slowly melting. If you say it one more time, I might just, perish right here.
You might just perish. That's fair enough. We see the Nilfgaardian Knight played there on the side of Green Knight and utilized to buff. Well, that's what it does. It buffs and opponents use it. Unit. We saw Molegions not buff anything because if there's nothing to buff, that doesn't trigger. But 8-point unit there is something that's actually targetable if you happen to have Leo in hand.
Mm-hmm. And it's scary if you're a blue coin player. All of a sudden you see your unit up to 8. I know Molegion. He specifically told us he was playing decks that tried not to have any units above 8 to try and take away value from these cards like Ike, like Geralt of Rivia, like Leo, for example, that can be huge swings if there's a target, but if not, they're 3-point plays, and that's a massive, differential in points. So now he's saying, uh-oh, he might have Leo, he might get a huge 11-point swing here for no reason.
But this is a little bit of a bamboozle on the side of Green Knight, because Green Knight doesn't actually have Leo in hand at all. He doesn't really have anything he can do other than maybe Peter those 2 points, and that's, I would say, a waste of Peter Sa Gwynleve. We see the Slave Driver utilized there. Slave Driver deals 2 damage, but for each lock on either side of the board increases damage. Unfortunately, no locks.
And we see players, Green Knight stacking that front row. Molegion, he doesn't know his opponent has Horn in hand or in the deck even, but if you read the way your opponent's playing, how they're positioning their units, you can, try and get a lot of information as well from their hand and what they could be trying to play as well and play around too. So obviously in Gwent, there's very small, minute details that if you pay attention, you can really, play around these things, and you've learned after playing, 300 games of Pro Ladder, you learn every single thing there is to learn about the game. So this might be, an indication that Horn is in hand and could be played in this round for Green Knight.
But the question for Molegion is how much does he want to invest in this round? Because if you look at his hand, he's got the Letho Serit Orcs.
Oh, there's your answer, Jaggers. You ask the question, you get the answer right away. And this is still a pretty big point gap. Horn can be played with a leader ability, would get it above that, to 28 would be just enough. Or actually just the Horn would be. Oh, no, you
need the leader. You need the 2 points from the leader. And that's where Morvaran really shines in terms of his leader ability, because it gives you the edge just to nudge your opponent out in terms of points. The more points that you win by, the more points you've spent that you could have spent elsewhere, right? So Morvaran is nice because if you're just ahead of your opponent and you're forcing them into playing cards that maybe they don't want to play, you're not wasting as much of your potential going forward.
Another important thing, we see, people might say, you could use Morvaran now and that's fine, but if you don't intend to bleed round 2, because this is still round 1, you can play 2 cards here. It looks like he's going down a ton of cards, and old Gwent, this would be, he lost the game. But in this case, you can go into round 2 with less cards. You dry pass when you're at 7, and then you draw back up to 10 in round 3 because of the hand limit that's now in Gwent. So For new players returning that haven't been playing Gwent too much, this is a bit of a difference here. You can now see there's 8 cards in hand for Green Knight. He can play 1 card and say, I'm done. My job is done here. Let's go to round 3. I'll be back at 10 cards, and we'll have equal cards for round 3.
And this could spell disaster for Molegion because with those Witchers, you often opt to thin them here, but they can also be used to stack a row and prepare for Commander's Horn. And if you have Menno in hand, not currently, but if he can find it for the final round, there could be an option for a double Horn in the final round, and that is one of those things that's more or less, unstoppable unless you have Erden.
The upside for Molegion is that he knows his opponent is going to do exactly what I've mentioned. He's going to play 1 card and pass the next turn. He's not going to try and bleed starting 2 cards down. So he knows he can play his own 3 cards and essentially kind of do a discard thing where he's playing his 3 worst cards and says, get out of my deck, you're very low provisions, I don't want to see you ever again. Play him in this round where points don't really matter, essentially, and go into round 3 with the best possible cards to win a very long round 3.
That's true. We see the Infiltrator you did mention being played here by Green Knight. We talked about that sweet spot with 7 cards, and now he's at that. So it's good going into that round for 8 cards for 2 reasons. One, he can utilize this Infiltrator without it being a low value card going into round 3, but also it then puts him into that spot where he can choose whether he wants to pass or not. But with Molegion on 10 cards, he can spend any cards he doesn't want for the final round now, and with or save those cards and draw and get extra mulligans.
The bad thing is, his hand is looking pretty good. I mean, you have to throw away cards that are going to be, not too bad. This is a gold card we're talking about here. Peter in this matchup, not going to be fantastic. We do see the pass right away from Green Knight, like we mentioned. It was, a very clear strategy choice once he went 2 cards down in round 1. And now we see some bronzes expended. There are worse cards in the deck, though. I think he would have preferred almost to have worse cards to just get rid of those mulligans in round 3 as well. But in this case, we see the important question now. Do you play Kyra next? Do you value... I guess not. Because now the Infiltrator goes into your deck because it wasn't killed, so...
Yeah, but you do have the extra mulligans because you chose to play down to 8 instead of down to 7. Now we find out which Witcher is Green Knight's favorite. He actually prefers Lambert. Do you want to hear a limerick?
No, don't Jaggerus. I don't want to hear it. But in this case, you see both players with some strange mulligan situations. You see the Witcher still in the deck for Green Knight. You're risking it. You have a great 9-point play, sure, but you can get a brick and that could lose you the game. And you can maybe mulligan some of these bronzes that you don't want to have in the hand. The same for a Molegion with the Infiltrators in the deck. So a bit of a risky mulligan for both of them. I think both hands are looking fairly decent. Menno is not in hand for Green Knight, which is a big loss of points here with a Sire and the Horn in hand already.
Although maybe not if we see Molegion controlling the units. Green Knight needs to set up a row, and he can quite comfortably do that because of Witchers. You don't often see them held till round 3. So the Commander's Horn could have been very, very good. However, if Molegion manages to stop the rows getting too stacked, that Menno could have backfired. So, is it necessarily bad? We'll see.
Well, I mean, there's some, I think, confusion in some plays for new players especially, where you have, say, a Horn in a short round or a Dragon's Dream in a short round. You don't get the full value. Maybe you hit 2 units. That's still, a decent, that's 6 points. There are cards that are worse than that. So even if it's a short round, even if it's not the best situation, I think Horn is such a fantastic, value card. So many points. It's expensive. It's 14 provisions, but it can give you a maximum of 15. It's worth the risk.
Yeah. And on top of that, the Asir, she does still give you 9 points of value in the Roach play that we actually saw Molegion utilize. We see the Slave Infantry being utilized here, transform an ally unit into a Slave Infantry, which are both soldiers. And that actually synergizes with the Vreemed we see here, boost a soldier ally and all copies of it by 2. However, we saw Molegion spend 1 of those Slave Infantry, so losing a little bit of value from the Vreemed, but he didn't have it in hand at that point, so not necessarily worth saving.
There is no Gimpy Gerwin in this deck for Green Knight. It does make an appearance in a different deck, but not this one, so there is no kind of direct counter to these Slave Infantries, which is a bit of a shame, I think, in terms of the point values. Looking at the golds in the deck right now for Green Knight, for Marvin's Blue Dream, it's a great card, but it has to find the right targets in the graveyard, and right now, there isn't too much. Peter could be kind of useful after the Horn is played, but still not the flashiest play, I think. Yeah,
it does explain, though, the Peter spend in the second round. Like, yes, you're losing a gold card, but you're also setting up the graveyard in order for your hand Marvin. But you do have options because if you look at the hand here, we have Leo Bonhart. We can be utilized to destroy a strong unit or a Witcher. And what is this on the other side? It's Seret, who is a Witcher, and she synergizes with cards in hand. And then look at the hand. We have both of the Seret synergies. So potentially we will see Molegion here killing the Seret and double utilizing hand Blue Dream to synergize and I guess, double Serret.
And of course, Kyrenex and Unicorn, you can steal them from your opponent and get that buff. Even if you're died, you steal your opponent and still get that the value with Hand Marvin's Blue Dream. So kind of a tech card that gives you, some different avenues to get points. Kind of not the usual way you play the deck. It depends a lot on your opponent's deck and not just your own.
That is true. We see Reamed coming down there. Unfortunately, the Slave Infantry's friend, he didn't make it, so only 1 boost there. But, considering that's still, 6 points of value for 7 provisions, I think it's not a bad tech card. And if you can get the value of all of the Slave Infantry, that becomes a lot better.
Some Gwent trivia for the newcomers. Reamed, at one point,
was a leader.
No one, I think still no one, it's a parallel universe that was only explored in this exact moment, but Reamed at some point was a leader for a tiny bit.
Yeah, maybe we'll see him again and he'll make Nilfgaard great again. That is the dream.
Of an Easter egg for you guys.
So we see the Nausicaa Sergeant coming down there, and that is a stacked row, and that row screams Commander's Horn. Boop.
And of course, Molegion doesn't know what Green Knight's deck is looking like right now, but he has a very, I think, a strong hint with that row stack in the back row.
And even denying, 1 unit from the row is still 3 points off Commander's Horn. Like, it's not bad. We saw the Letho. Because of Serret in hand, he's allowed to deal 3 damage. If there was no Serret in hand, there would be no damage. And that 3 damage was perfect for not only removing the Nausicaa Sergeant, but also denying the value of it, because whenever he plays a unit with Deploy, boost self by 1. So, engine removal.
Just in case the Sergeant got any ideas to start buffing itself in the graveyard, well, it's going to be locked, so no chance, buddy.
So here's the Asir play with Roach, and that Roach, that's what you wanted. Roach
Well, maybe that's too much. Don't play into last rate too much, Roach. Get out of there. We already have 5 units. The party's full.
Nah, this pony party, right? We got Kyrenex, we got Unicorn. The horse is going to have a party too, Panda.
I think it also means that now Molegion could have maybe be scared of Menno, having a 17-point swing after a 15-point swing come in. You can say, where's my Yurden now? I really would have loved to have it, but in this case, he knows not to be scared of that. Sire comes down, kind of stops that play from being a thing. And another small hint to give Molegion, kind of a read on what your opponent has in the hand.
I think we may see something like the Orcs fairly soon. If you don't feel like your opponent's going to have targets to lock, that's not a bad play. Although the Leo, they're being utilized to kill that Serret. And again, enabling that Hand Marvin is a totally fine line of play. Because Nilfgaard is not very engine heavy, things like removal and locks, you're okay to spend them, especially if your hand is the way that Molegion's is, where you still have the Serret for 5 points of damage. Although if you spend that Ox, that goes down to 3.
This is the players now in their head starting to think, trying to order the cards in the the sequencing order they're going to play them in, and start saying, how can I get the most value out of these cards? What order do I play them in? Of course, what your opponent plays also affects it, but in the most case, you have to know, to try and save Kyrenex for later, to try and kill your opponent's Kyrenex. Maybe you could wait for more value on Leo, but maybe you think it's time to play it now, like you said, to enable Hand Marvins, to play that the next turn. So this is one of the most important things about Gwent, the sequencing, trying to get the maximum value from every single one of your plays, because at the end, we win the round maybe by 3 or 4 points, and that's all about sequencing.
And it also depends on targeting, because with these cards, 5 damage, you're like, oh yeah, I can target Asir, she's 6. But once that becomes a 1-point unit, suddenly you see a lot more value from the Slave Infantry. So sometimes it may be better to target something that's less powerful just to kill it and remove it from the board, rather than have those units that can be healed or transformed.
And Green Knight can say, I have 5 units in the back row, why not play Horn now, make sure I can get the full value, but then you say, what if my opponent has Yurden? That's a direct answer, and he has, 5 turns to play that, gives him a big window where he can maybe spend it earlier on if your opponent thinks you don't have it, so it's a lot of mind games for sure.
That's true, and Commander's Horn, I expect we'll see coming down later. We saw Kyrenex, so not Kyrenex, Unicorn is joining the Pony Club. Reamed, he's on a horse, he counts, so he can be part of the club too, boosting the units, and you notice none of them going above 8.
I didn't mention it before, but I saw it. As soon as I saw the 3-point card in Molegion's hand, I knew that's the card that was going to get the buff from the Unicorn, because it keeps it under 8. And if there was a Leo Bonheart in hand for Green Knight, that would be a huge point swing that could, again, win you the game if you're taking away 8 points from your opponent. So very small things going on here, but very important things as well.
And I think it's typically better with the Unicorn not to boost quite so big, because, like I said, there's the pony party, right? So Kyrenex will deal more damage if Unicorn is on the board. Unicorn will boost by more if Kyrenex is on the board. And I think you're better off to maybe over damage than over boost, because boosts are quite commonly killed or reset. Whereas if you lose a couple points from the damage, at least you've hit, say, a 5 or a 6 rather than a 4.
Bruver and Morvran both have very versatile leaders. You can buff the Unicorn and the Kyrenex up to 6. Makes it a lot harder to remove. There are a lot of cards that deal 4 damage, but very few that deal 6 and can deal with that in 1 turn. So it allows to keep that alive and get the full 20 points for 18 provisions from that pair of magical horses.
And we see the 5-point target set up for Seret there with the Slave Infantry, actually 2 of them. And because we talked about the Handmarvin, which plays a unit from the opponent's graveyard, and that secondary Seret, which we can now see in the graveyard, there's another target just sitting pretty there, ready to be removed, and see a 10-point value from the Witcher.
And Horn will be a huge swing here. But
yeah,
still,
but
Green Knight is he's very far behind. He doesn't have mana to give him that super boost later on as well. He does have strong cards in hand. I think we'll definitely see Unicorn buffed up to 6 as well, like we mentioned. I'd be very surprised. Oh, he's seen the Kyrenex come. He hasn't seen the Kyrenex come down.
But
actually.
you wouldn't, yeah. If you expect Kyrenex, you wouldn't boost the Unicorn. Maybe you just expect it to be removed. I mean, if you put all of those boosts in, it would potentially protect it. But then you know that Peter's in the graveyard, and maybe you're expecting Handmarvin. I reckon we'll see Handmarvin here to grab the Seret and remove that Unicorn, and just deny that extra value from the Kyrenex. Come on, Molegion, make me look smart.
Of course, even if Unicorn dies, there are still units in the back row. There's still 5 units there. And like we mentioned, Horn could have been played a long time ago, but Green Knight wants to try and play around maybe a Yurden that could be in the deck. We saw Cam's teching with Yurden quite a lot. Like Jagras mentioned, we see Seret come down. The reach there could be important in Molegion.
Molegion lucky, a little bit of a, well, not a misplay. I think you can play her either play in.
He wants them together, Jagras. He wants the duo together.
The Serets, they're friends.
They don't get boosted, but maybe in the future. Who knows? Leaks.
44 to 27, 17 points in it. One card difference.
It's a big gap. Kyrenex still damages for 8 if he needs it right now. Lambert would be the option here. We see the first Kyrenex come down. Only 4 damage. Unicorn has been killed.
And there's a 7-point target on the side of Green Knight for the Kyrenex in the hand of Molegion. And guess who it is? It's Lambert. You heard about my limerick?
Same answer.
Still no.
No, and I don't want to hear it.
Who has this? It's very close.
Ox is just 5 points.
Equal,
the locks
yeah.
are great, but there's no damage. It's only a lock effect, and you don't have many engine units in Nilfgaard, at least not in this round. And there's still a 20-point gap in
That's
hand
not
here.
enough. He's got 20 points in hand, but 5 on the side. I mean, the leaders 2 and 3, so I think that's Molegion's round. Commander's Horn, not quite so commanding. Double Commander's Horn though. Menno, we talked about whether that would.
There's the immediate pass from Green Knight. He knows he does not have enough points and keeps the information to himself. But Molegion very happy to take this mirror. It's always going to be a very close game. A lot of the same cards being played for both decks. In this case, there were some differences, but Molegion is able to fight ahead. And like we said, it was going to be very few points. If Green Knight played all of his cards, it would be very few points what the difference would be in this last round. So the small plays are what mattered.
And I think a lot of it came down to just not having that Menno, because being able to play Commander's Horn 15 points twice, that's 30 points. And it's not something that can be denied, really, by Molegion. You know, because he had the Witchers in round 3, it would have been massive, and that would have been too much. But the Handmarvin ultimately turned out to be the better play.
And as Green Knight, I mean, mentally, you start on blue coin, you lose the first game, you say, well, I was blue coin, he had a better matchup, it was Monster didn't have any removal for his engines, it's fine, you know? You're still mentally strong. You go into the second game, you really have to claw back into the series and tie it, if you can. It's a mirror match, and you're starting on red coin, so inherently you have the benefit there, and still you lose the game. Mentally, that becomes, a much harder task to come back into this, to try and get this reverse sweep, so we'll see if, he's a new player. This is his first time playing in the big stage with viewers, with, everyone watching his every move. And this is kind of the moment where he really has to show that he's here to stay, and he has to try and claw back into a very difficult reverse sweep against a kind of veteran player in Molegion.
Yeah, he has to shut down this Ada 3 times back to back. Although he does have artifact removal in all of his decks, so he has that option at least to try and deny the summoning circle. And if he can win this one, he's going to be more familiar with what his opponent's playing. In both of these games, there was lack of familiarity with the lists, and the more you play against someone, the more chance, I guess, you have of winning. But Green Knight is new. Molegion's been here before. Molegion has played this game before. He's qualified for an Open. He sat in that seat, and he's played a very long set. Green Knight, on the other hand, he's not done this before. And I think experience is one of those things that it's hard to account for how impactful it is, but it's definitely something that's impactful.
So Morvan, commonly known as a locked archetype, because it has so many different versions of, being able to lock cards, even with bronze units, which is very strong against a deck like Northern Realms, or a faction like Northern Realms that has all these engines that do, get you a lot of value over a long term, but if they're locked, they do, a lot less. I
mean, I feel like Molegion, though, he like he said to us, he's targeting Bran and he's targeting monsters. So if Green Knight does get a win with this Nilfgaard deck, this is probably the less surprising win for Molegion. Like, he may be fine with that happening.
And this is threat number one. As the Nilfgaard player to decide what is worth a lock. You say, maybe this isn't worth a lock, maybe I just let it slide and then it gets a ton of value, and then you say, maybe, that was a whoopsie from me. So it's hard to say because there are so many threats. Obviously, this is a bronze card. It's theoretically not going to be the strongest or most impactful card in your opponent's deck, but if you let it do its thing for 8 turns that this round 1 could be, then all of a sudden you're in trouble. So it's very hard to decide when exactly to use your locks and when the best time is to do it. The good thing about Ox, for example, though, is that if it's a bronze card, there's normally 2 of them, and that means not double the value, but a little bit more. But
only if Seret is in hand, and we don't see Seret on the side of Green Knight. But what we do see is a couple of these slave drivers, and slave drivers synergize quite nicely with the lock, and that actually may give Green Knight some of the removal that he's going to need to handle these engine overload decks.
A straight buff to the Knight, going up to 11 strength, and right away some damage coming into that Revenant. At 2 strength, Mr. Slave Driver here is looking like a big target for the Revenant. Gonna try and get some value from him.
But you have to pick it by 1. How's he
there's not really a way to do it right now. You have, if it was a 4 strength unit, you could use the damn Sorceress to get it down to 1 and then get that value from the Revenant. But in this case, not quite the board state to benefit that.
That's true. I think this Revenant's going to be interesting in terms of whether or not it sees value. It's a nice card when you're running something like Sabrina, because she's 1 point, you play her on the other side, then you kill her with the Revenant, and actually, look at that.
Or just, you can kill yourself. Sometimes it's, well, maybe, I'm not going to continue with that thought, but Revenant gets some value in the game of Gwent.
Yeah, that's worth noting, is the Kidweni Revenants, they don't have to shoot an enemy, they can shoot one another, and this one is now a 1 strength Revenant. So actually, Green Knight's enabled the new Revenant to shoot this Revenant and then start getting more Revenants.
And there's some cards that have these kind of very subtle ways of getting value where, well, if you're on the opposite side of this, you think, why does that have the chance to kill its own? This is too strong. Can we please get a nerf here? I mean, there's cards that normally doesn't happen, so you don't really think about it. When it does happen, you're like, really? This is also, fair?
I mean, it does get heavily shut down by Gimpy and also Orcs, like you said, if Seret was in hand. And this is just one of those unfortunate situations where Seret, I mean, we saw her at the party twice in the past game, but she's not around right now.
This is a round that Green Knight has to push to the very end. He knows that if he goes into a long round against Ada, it's game over, and he has to keep that Peter, I think, to respond to the Hubert, for example. That's kind of the big win condition in this Ada deck, and in a lot of Northern Realms decks, actually, it's all about Hubert. It's kind of the star of the show, and we've seen if that card gets shut down, then it's almost game over for Northern Realms in some cases.
That's totally true. And this round, though, not too bad. We see Green Knight opting to start to thin. So we've got these Imperial Brigades. When you play one, it summons the other. We have the Witchers, which also summon their friends from the deck. And once you've started thinning, that does make the Commander's Horn more likely to show up in hand. And we talked about that strategy in the last game. So maybe what he's trying to do necessarily here is not only secure last play, but also thin the deck out and get set up for, a big commanding horn.
And there's the suicidal play again from the Revenant, and now this time we're setting up a few more plays with the Revenants. If they're not locked immediately, we have the Nilfgaardian Knight can get hit by the Sorceress down to 1 and then ping it again next turn. We see Vincent maze as well. If he sees maybe the 4, he thinks that's good enough value and goes for that play to synergize with the Revenant as well. So this is the kind of card that I said could snowball way out of control if you don't take care of it.
How long do you allow this to go on? Because now you have the choice of, do you deal with the Kidweni Revenant or do you deal with Vez? Vez is going to give an ally Zeal, meaning that if it's an order unit, it can play immediately rather than waiting a turn. And the thing with Vest, though, she's a bit awkward. Like, if you kill her, you then still have to kill whatever they're going to play that they were going to give Zeal. So what do you do here? And this is where you have to start making decisions on what's going to see the most value for Molegion and what do you want to deny. And that can be very tricky. Nothing.
The Witchers instead going to keep, maybe disrespecting these Revenants a bit too much, and the Vest as well, letting them go unanswered for now. And Molegion will keep on scratching a tiny bit of value here and there with this engine-based Northern Realms deck.
And he still hasn't committed his Witches himself, so he has that answering trio to thin out of the deck too. And I don't know, it's a tricky one. I think Green Knight's just decided that these aren't the engines he's looking for.
Or it could be just a big point push. You could play Menno the next turn. You have the Menno body and the Horn as well in that back row. You play the Horn, all of a sudden you're a ton of points ahead and your opponent has to start playing a lot of cards to catch up. And he's already down to 6, so he can't really do the trick that Green Knight did the last game. So it becomes a little bit scary. The engine decks, they're great over a long round, but when you need those burst points, sometimes you don't have them.
We see the pass actually coming out. It seems that Green Knight just wanting to thin out his deck and get prepped for a big round 3 rather than necessarily push too much in this round. And I find that okay. You know, you talked about spending the Menno here, but then that's his flashy finisher. That's your big.
Well, you can always shuffle the Sire back, and now it gets a bit scary. You're giving NR control of the game. You know there's a card called Hubert in your opponent's deck, and if you can't answer, you don't have last say, which in this case he will not have because he lost this round 1. It gets a lot tricky. You have the locks, sure. You kept all of your locks for round 3, so saying play some of your cards now. I'm not going to lock them. Keep them instead for round 3. But do you have enough locks? That's the end. That's kind of the question here, I think.
Yeah, and ultimately, Molegion deciding exactly how he kind of wants to round this out and whether there's anything he wants to play, I guess, from his hand. Now he is ahead, so I would say pass.
I mean, he could play a card and then just not play anything in round 2 and go straight. He's going to go for a long round 100% of the time. We do see 2 very interesting cards drawn. Tainted Ale on the side of Molegion, Bomb Heaver on the side of Green Knight.
And the Bomb Heaver also Summoning Circle on the side of Molegion, so he's got the removal for the artifacts, and I don't think we're going to be seeing a Bomb Heaver mulligan.
Unfortunately, Bomb Heaver only throws 1 bomb, not 2, so one of those artifacts will survive.
It's a heavy bomb, man. He can only manage to heave 1.
And you could look at Tainted Ale and say, this is a 6-point card.
No, it's not.
But it's not, because Hubert comes down, you have last say, Tainted Ale cannot be interacted with unless you use Bomb Heaver to destroy it. That's going to be a 12-point swing instead with the Hubert synergy, so we'll see what he deems more valuable. NR has control, so Summoning Circle could be a huge thing in the long run as well.
Unfortunately, though, Molegion does have 2 Blue Stripe Commanders in hand, and you can't summon your friends if they're already in hand.
You know, so straight pass, Infiltrator played a fantastic kind of carryover card. I mentioned before, it's hard to kind of say exactly how much value it gets. Ooh. But Hubert and Botchling drawn for Molegion. He's a very happy
Seer picked up by Green Knight. So we've got the double horn potentially.
Listen, when I play against an R, I look at my hand, I say, oh, this is fantastic. And then Hubert is playing, and I say, well, why does this card exist? Because the swing it gets if you don't control the damaging engines like Tainted Ale, like Aquas, for example, is oh so scary.
Yeah, he isn't, you know, he's called Huge Bert sometimes for a reason, because we'll see just how big he can get, and he does, in fact, sometimes wreck.
And Ada as well, it's a leader that you think, oh, it's an 8-point leader, has removal, which is normally valued at higher than just 8-point boost, for example, in Gwent. But once you pair it with Hubert and you have last say, it's a 16-point leader instead. So situational, but when it works, oh boy, does it work. We
did actually see the Ike mulligan there on the side of Molegion, so he doesn't think that the Nilfgaard is going to go as tall as he needs to get value out of the card, and I think that's completely fair. Nilfgaard's not very tall. Not very tall unless you slap 2 horns onto everyone. Just put 1 horn on each side of their head, and then they're all of a sudden all 10-point units. So it might have been a mistake there, but he does have Octopus in hand as well, so it would have been a great chance to get a great point swing. But like we said, it's a risk-reward kind of thing. You have to think, do I want a dead 3-point card? Is it worth the risk? Maybe not. I'm going to mulligan instead. And Green Knight really taking his time here. This is where you have to really think about your sequencing. Like, you know, this is his last chance to make it through to the semifinals. He needs to win this game and then 2 more if he's going to make it. So you can, value the players considering all of their options before they play. And, not great opening plays here, really. Not really at all. That's it. Peter for 3 points. That's what I want to see. High tier Gwent gameplay going on. Summoning Circle normally cannot be interacted with, I think. If it's a turn 1 Summoning Circle, I think Green Knight's going to respect this and say, this is my chance to take it down. He might not have Tainted Ale in hand. So that's the thing where if you see an option to take it down, it might just be the best option because you're risking on the chance he might have Tainted Ale in some universe, but maybe not in this one. So I think Summoning Circle in and of itself is also a very powerful card. It gains charges every round, and then you can turn those charges into provisions, basically. So you summon a card with provisions less than or equal to your summoning circle charge count. I can't speak today. So that in and of itself is a threat. If you look at kind of the options, you've got a lot of things that are pretty powerful. They are high provisions, but could potentially be a big threat. And I don't hate the removal, but I don't think he necessarily has to spend it now because it takes time for those charges to show up. And it is 10 cards are going to be played in this round. It's going to be a very long round. If it was a short round, you would say it's going to be 1, maybe 5, 6 provision card. That's fine. I'll let it slide. But in this case, it's a very long round because NR has control of the game plan, has control of, dictating how long each round is. And this is all about non-interactivity at the beginning. A lot of cards are
3 power, deal 2 damage. At this point, you can't play that because you have an artifact you can't damage, really.
And this is a very clear read from Molegion. As soon as he saw Peter go down there, he knew Green Knight has a handful of reactive cards.
Yep.
And so the Bomb Heaver was the smartest play there, just because everything else here kind of needs a target. Admittedly, Unicorn, you can boost your own unit, so now you have those targets. That becomes a much more viable play. And I do think spending the Peter rather than spending something like the Letho, you could spend the Letho just as a 6-point body, but you lose the lock. And I think you kind of need the locks.
Oh, the Unicorn Bamboozle may be thinking about buffing Sabrina and keeping that for the end, but like you said, without any real plays in hand to be able to kind of play now earlier on, you can't really offer that luxury of keeping that for later, trying to play around a possible play, a possible Sabrina that could win you the game possibly, but maybe it's too risky to go down that route.
Also, in terms of Sabrina, when you see Tainted Ale that you can't deal with, it's maybe not worth saving a card to try and buff it, because Sabrina is very likely to die the turn that she's been played. Molegion is going to, I think, have none of that in terms of denial of Sabrina. So I think the Unicorn is definitely the right play there, because everything else here is reactive, and you want to use those locks on the right targets. You don't want to Commander's Home 3 things, It's tricky.
We see 3 locks in hand. For Green Knight, you have to, like we said before, sometimes the Revenant comes down, he looks kind of scary, but you know the Auk-Fist might be in hand, and that's going to get you a ton more value with Hubert and Last Save, for example. So same with the Botchling as well. So you have to really decide, I have 3 bullets. Who am I killing in this round? That's kind of the decision here.
And there are plenty of good targets on the side of Molegion. We've got the Botchling, like you said, the Auk-Fist, and then potentially maybe a Blue Stripe Commando or a Temerian Drummer, whichever one you feel is more problematic.
And most of these engines are, typical, kind of the average 1 point per turn engines. But the magical thing about Botchling is that if you damage it, we talk about non-interactivity, it can flip, and then the damage goes absolutely nowhere. You get no value from that. So I think it's always kind of wise to play the Botchling first before the other 1 point engines, and then get that extra bit of subtle value in the long round as well.
Yeah, and then you get beautiful Ghost Baby instead of Creepy Mole.
That's definitely what I call them as well, Jaggers. Thank you for that fantastic imagery. Or you can do that. Unicorn's on the board, Karnax deals 8 damage, and Botchling cannot heal from its grave. Well, it kind of can, because
Gwent low.
Let's not give any spoilers. You can play Witcher 3 if you haven't already. Great game.
Imagine not having played Witcher 3. So, Molegion, he's still got a lot of options in hand, but the thing is, the denial of Green Knight combined with this double horn that we potentially, I think, will see, I think it's going to be too much. I don't know. Is Hubert really going to be enough for that?
And this is all about if you have experience with this matchup or not. If you're looking at this board, you're a new player, you haven't played against Hubert yet, you haven't found out, what he's all about. You say, I'm 25 points up. This game is too easy. And then the last turn comes around, Auk-Fist goes off, Vincent kills 17 people, and all of a sudden Hubert is at 37 strength. And then you say, well, I'll learn this for next time. I won't let NR get control of the last round.
Auk-Fist isn't going to go off.
Well, because you have locks in hand. That is very true. But in some matchups, you don't have any control, and you find out, Hubert's true form.
His true form. He is a sneaky fellow. You can see him here checking out Priscilla.
Also, imagery that I wanted to have in my mind. Thank you, Jagger.
You don't want to check out Priscilla?
I'm gonna not comment on that one.
I mean, Dandelion's here. We can talk to him.
And we're gonna see the hand here. There are not really that many threats that you want to lock. There isn't, kind of things like Selkirk, for example. A lot of these big lockable targets. Botchling already died, so you don't have to lock him. You can save your locks for later. So we're talking about Hubert being a huge threat, but maybe with Ada's still a thing.
Yeah.
Tainted Ale's still a thing. So that's already gonna be a 22-point swing onto Hubert just from the damage, from Ada and the Tainted Ale, for example.
But I think you have to use the ale to kill Sabrina.
One tick. Or depends on how many
Sabrina
more.
then accounts for a lot of points if you're stacking her over Commander's Horn.
First lock comes down. We're talking about reactivity. You don't normally want to lock the drummer. He's a drummer, right? He's not a dragon that breathes fire and damages all your units. But in this case, you kind of have to, because you don't want to get suboptimal points on the horn either.
Yep.
You have to wait for a sire to shuffle the horn back and the Menno, etc. So it does get a bit tricky here.
Yeah, and in terms of the way that you utilize the lock. The Letho also does tell Molegion that there's another lock coming, because Letho can only lock when Orcs is in hand. Otherwise, he's kind of just standing there awkwardly, 6 points with his knives.
And I think Horn has to come down here.
I think so.
Igni, thankfully, is not currently in the meta, or else Green Knight would be sweating very large drops of sweat.
Very large drops of sweat. See, now you're giving me mental imagery.
This is for the viewers, maybe some blind viewers watching the Gwent Open. They have to get the correct, state of mind for this round 3.
That's fair enough. So we'll see I would imagine Blue Stripe Commando go off. Do you spend a lock here? I mean, it's correct because of the state of the
I don't
hand.
think so. I mean, look how many points you have. You're playing 15 points. You really have to be scared of those massive, massive point swings with the Hubert. Not really. I think it's just not worth it, to be honest.
You have 2 locks, right? And what are your other targets?
And you have, but you don't know. You don't know your opponent's deck. You still have 5 cards left. And once you have the optimal value on Horn, you think, it's time to pull the trigger because the Horn play unlocks the Asire play. The Asire play unlocks the Menno play.
Yeah.
So the sequencing matters so much. I mean, Green Knight's mind right now, he sees these cards, he sees a number on each of them. 5 turns from the end, 4 turns from the end, 3 turns from the end. It's all planned out already for the most part.
Yeah, you do have to kind of sequence that, and then when the bigger threats show up, then they show up. But if he had locked that, you would have been able to deny 8 points from Blue Stripe Commander because Vincent has Zeal, and
true.
Sabrina will likely be killed on the turn that she is played. And
He
Hubert
couldn't
is the
know.
boy.
There could have been a Synthesis Blades, for example.
Ooh, is it
maybe.
gonna be
Actually, he saw it revealed, so he knows it's not in hand, actually.
And Commander's Horn back in the deck. What does Menno do? He target draws a tactic from your deck. If you play it on the Ranger.
And what's in the deck? A tactic card called Commander's Horn. It does, we just saw it, 15 points. 5 units by 3 on that row. So if you have a stacked row, it's going to be a ton of points. You see, right now, kind of the false narrative where you see 26 points, but Hubert is a lot of points. I think not enough due to the locks onto the Octopus especially, and possibly the buff onto Sabrina, although Tainted will come down as well. It might just be enough, actually, though. I mean, the row stack here from Green Knight.
Playing into the Sabrina though.
Tainted as well without interaction.
It's hard to
call.
call.
I'm not going to do the math. This is
I don't
very
think we
difficult.
Need to
You have to multiply everything times 2. I mean, come on. That's some hard math right there.
I like this Vincent here being played here. There's Vincent. You need a non-boosted enemy unit, and the only non-boosted enemy unit.
Ooh, in the past, this is a greedy. This is Molegion saying, I'm a ton of points behind. I saw the Horn shuffled back. I have to start playing greedy. And
that provided value for the lock.
It did.
Because now the Alba Armor Cavalry or the Orcs can deny Vincent from resetting something, and by doing that, the Seer doesn't get put down to 1.
So you lose 5 points, but if you wait, the setting the unit down to 1 counts as damage as well for Hubert. So this is Molegion saying, I'm very far behind. I have to start taking very big risks for very big rewards. He was punished, but of course, when you're in this position, you have to kind of start doing that, kind of have that state of mind to try and get the maximum points possible.
Yeah, we talked about how close it is, and you can clearly tell that Molegion thinks this is going to be a victory that is fought tooth and nail. You go Ogfist here, or you go Sabrina? I think you save Ogfist for Hubert.
You have to go Ogfist
before
after.
Hubert.
Or you have to play Sabrina or Ogfist now. You can't wait more because then Ogfist has orders as well, so you can't really. You know what I mean?
No, I get what you're saying. I'm just wondering in terms of lock, because you can't lock Sabrina, so he could actually safely play Sabrina now and then utilize the damage later. But if he does that,
I love. Well, I guess he could have buffed it anyway with the Horn, so it wouldn't matter. The positioning wouldn't matter too much actually.
But does Molegion choose to kill it now? That's the question. He didn't.
Yeah.
So the Commander's Horn is going to come back to the party.
Well, you can always add a Sabrina.
That's true.
If it's buffed enough, then just go all in. Just pour down all that damage onto Sabrina.
Yeah.
The poor, she's already taken enough damage on that fiery
And actually, that's going to then play into the Hubert, and he's going to be big. But 40.
I think it might just be too big of a point gap. The lock on the Aquas is massive. It's a ton of value that's taken away. So I think it might just be too much here.
But you've also got 6 points of damage that's doubled from the Ale, right? Because the Tainted Ale does 6, and then the Hubert, like we said, boosts self by the amount of damage you dealt to enemies this turn. We're going to see damage from Ada, but not full value because Sabrina's only 4. Damage from Sabrina, damage from Tainted Ale.
If we live in a world where Hubert can catch up 50 points in the last round, I don't want to live in this world anymore, Jaggers.
No, me neither, but...
There's no chance, and if it does happen, I'm out of here. I mean, it's going to be close. This is already down to 30-ish points. Ooh. Hubert comes down, multiplying every damage this turn by 2.
We haven't seen Ada, because he managed to kill it without it. He didn't
I think it's going to be enough. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my gosh. And that hurts.
My friends, this is what I was talking about. 31-point Hubert comes down, and when you give up last say against NR, you can have all the locks in the world, but Tainted Ale survived the Bomb Heaver, Summoning Circle instead going down, and Ada, of course, with last say, you can't really lock a leader.
Molegion is a savage.
And that's a 3-0 sweep here. Green Knight not giving enough respect to this NR list, taken down by someone that's slowly starting to become a veteran in the scene as well.
And Molegion's strategy, very, very clear. And do you think the other players are worried about this, considering how much monsters in Skellige we've seen?
Well, you always have the chance to just fight for round 1. Just try and make sure you have the last say in round 3, and then all of that doesn't matter because Hubert goes up to 31, and then you have, Jurden, you have Cam is bringing Jurden, for example. Both players are going to meet in the semifinals, so Cam's is out. That's true. So never mind. Cam's can maybe play Green Knight in a show match sometime.
You're done. He's done.
So Jurden's not a problem. I think Molegion will be very happy about that one, to be honest.
Yeah, I think Molegion, clearly the strategy that Aratuza prepped, in at least in this situation, was the right call, and you can tell that they've come into this with the strategy. And people talk about targeting in Gwent and whether it is a viable strategy going into this tournament series. And the soft targeting, I think, is working out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a thing in every tournament we've seen for the most part. Hard targeting is where it gets a little bit iffy because you go so all in on a strategy where if your opponent doesn't bring that deck or that archetype, you're playing very suboptimal decks. But soft targeting, a card or two in each deck that does something against a specific matchup or a range of matchups can do wonders. And Molegion showed it here, taking control of monsters, banning the one deck Brewer they thought would be a threat in a long round against, Ada, for example, or his Vandal was also an engine-based deck. And in the end, takes it with a very clean 3-0 sweep and I think becomes one of the favorites to take this. We still have to see a lot of big players like Tailbot and Colomon in the next few quarterfinals, but making a big point right here.
I mean, he's walking in the footsteps of the other Aratuza members. We've seen DeMarcus do this. We've seen Andy Wan do this. And, commiserations to Green Knight. I think he played that well, but I think he was, a little bit of the underdog based on the decks. We will now be finding out, however, what Molegion has to say for himself as we throw over to the interview with Pavel Berger.
Talk about a huge bird. 31 points, what a win. But let's go back to the Squirtle match. Did Pavko Gale win you the match?
Of course. I think there would be literally no way for me to win that match if I didn't have Pavko Gale in my deck. So the takeaway from this game is that Pavko is awesome, guys. Play it in your Squirtle list. Well, it was pretty strong, especially with Yennefer Conjurer, right? It allowed me to shoot multiple units multiple times. So yeah, Pavko is really powerful. I relied a bit on surprise factor with that deck. I don't think Green Knight could expect it because it's like a brand new deck built 2 days before the deadline. So shout out to Gwent to Town for the idea because it's awesome. And yeah, Pavko is good.
That is a really fresh deck and I can't wait to try it at home. But let's talk about your opponent in the semis. Wangid, how do you feel going against him?
Oh, well, Wangid is playing Shub decks, so far I realized. So tomorrow I'm serving a troll soup for everyone.
Troll soup coming tomorrow. I'm hungry, so I'm in for that. And let's go back to the casters.